Hello, YouTube. I am Shaggy. I am Philolitea, and I am going to continue the Spoopyween reading. It is cold. Let me get in my sleeping bag. Actually, I'm going to get into two sleeping bags. Two sleeping bags? What are you, some kind of a guy who doesn't want to freeze to death? Yeah, I'm some kind of a guy who doesn't want to freeze to death. Wow! Motherfucker! I don't like being cold, bro. The Texans disappoint on national television. The Falcons disappoint on national television. Golly gee willikers. Golly gee willikers. Primetime game, man. Gotta step it up. Play well. Play your best game. Can't be your worst game. Okay. And that one comes off. Let's see how it goes to behind the maid. Like so. Why isn't this what I did yesterday? Because it wasn't this cold. I spent a lot of time last winter like this. I'm putting more weight on the tent than I should be. Hey, Gina. Don't tell me what to do. How are you, Gina? Hello, Ryan. I should tell you what to do? Why do you want me to tell you what to do? Unless you mean I should tell you to go to bed because you're sleeping. I'm not your boss. Not your dad. I need to pull my little seat doodad a little forward. What's the sit rep? I don't know what that means. But these don't have titles, so they can go unread. All right. Let's get a cigarette and let's get it did. I barely got that lit. Hello, ACT. What's up? Hello, Josh. We continue from Edward Bulwer Lytton's The Coming Race, Chapter 18. As Tari and myself, on quitting the town and leaving to the left, the main road which led to it, struck into the fields, the strange and solemn beauty of the landscape lighted up by numberless lamps, to the verge of the horizon fascinated my eyes, and rendered me for some time an inattentive listener to the talk of my companion. Along our way, various operations of agriculture were being carried on by machinery, the forms of which were new to me, and, for the most part, very graceful. For among these people, art being so cultivated for the sake of mere utility exhibits itself in adorning or refining the shapes of useful objects. Precious metals and gems are so profuse among them that they are lavished on things devoted to purposes the most commonplace, and their love of utility leads them to beautify its tools and quickens their imagination in a way unknown to themselves. In all service, whether in or out of doors, they make great use of automaton figures, which are so ingenious and so pliant to the operations of vril that they actually seem gifted with reason. It was scarcely possible to distinguish the figures I beheld, apparently guiding or superintending the rapid movements of vast engines, from human forms endowed with thought. By degrees, as we continued to walk on, my attention became roused by the lively and acute remarks of my companion. The intelligence of the children among this race is marvelously precocious, perhaps from the habit of having entrusted to them at so early an age the toils and responsibilities of middle age. Indeed, in conversing with Tari, I felt as if talking with some superior and observant man of my own years. I asked him if he could form any estimate of the number of communities into which the race of the Vril Ya is subdivided. Not exactly, he said, because they multiply, of course, every year as the surplus of each community is drafted off. But I heard my father say that, according to the last report, there were 1.5 million of communities speaking our language and adopting our institutions and forms of life and government, but, I believe, with some differences, about which you had better ask Z. She knows more than most of the Arna do, and Arn cares less for things that do not concern him than a guy does. The guy are inquisitive creatures. Does this community restrict itself to the same number of families or amount of population that you do? No. Some have much smaller populations, some have larger, varying according to the extent of the country they appropriate, or to the degree of excellence to which they have brought their machinery. Every community sets its own limit according to circumstances, taking care always that there shall never arise any class of poor by the pressure of population upon the productive powers of the domain, and that no state shall be too large for a government resembling that of a single well-ordered family. I imagine that no Vril community exceeds 30,000 households, but, as a general rule, the smaller the community, provided there be hands enough to do justice to the capacities of the territory it occupies, the richer each individual is, and the larger the sum contributed to the general treasury. Above all, the happier and the more tranquil is the whole political body, and the more perfect the products of its industry. The state, which all tribes of the Vril Ya acknowledge to be the highest in civilization, and which has brought the Vril force to its full development, is perhaps the smallest. It limits itself to 4,000 families, but every inch of its territory is cultivated to the most perfection of garden around. Its machinery excels that of every other tribe, and there is no product of its industry in any department which is not sought for, at extraordinary prices, by each community of our race. All our tribes make this state their model, considering that we should reach the highest state of civilization allowed to mortals if we could unite the greatest degree of happiness with the greatest degree of intellectual achievement, and it is clear that the smaller the society, the less difficult that will be. Ours is too large for it. This reply set me thinking. I reminded myself of that little state of Athens, with only 20,000 free citizens, and which to this day our mightiest nations regard as the supreme guide and model in all departments of intellect. But then Athens permitted fierce rivalry and perpetual change, and was certainly not happy. Rousing myself from the reverie into which these reflections had plunged me, I brought back our talk to the subjects connected with immigration. But, said I, when, I suppose, yearly a certain number among you agree to quit home and found a new community elsewhere, they must necessarily be very few and scarcely sufficient, even with the help of the machines they take with them, to clear the ground and build towns and form a civilized state with the comforts and luxuries in which they had been reared. You mistake. All the tribes of the Vril-Ya are in constant communication with each other and settle amongst themselves each year with proportion of one community. What proportion of one community will unite with the immigrants of another, and as to form a state to sufficient size. And the place for immigration is agreed upon at least a year before, and pioneers sent from each state to level rocks and embank waters and construct houses, so that when the immigrants at last go, they find a city already made and a country around it at least partially cleared. Our hardy life as children make uh, our hardy life as children make us take cheerful uh, make us take cheerfully to travel and adventure. I mean to emigrate myself when of age. Do the immigrants always select places hitherto uninhabited and barren? As yet, generally, because it is our will never to destroy except when necessary to our well-being. Of course, we cannot settle in lands already occupied by the Vril-Ya, and if we take the cultivated lands of the other races of Varna, we must utterly destroy the previous inhabitants. Sometimes, as it is, we take waste spots and find that a troublesome, quarrelsome race of Varna, especially if under the administration of Kumpash or Gleknaz, resents our vicinity and picks a quarrel with us, then, of course, as menacing our welfare, we destroy it. There is no coming to terms of peace with a race so idiotic that it is always changing the form of government which represents it. Kumpash, said the child emphatically, is bad enough. Still, it has brains, though at the back of its head are not with, and is not without a heart. But in Gleknaz, the brain and heart of the creature disappear, and they become all jaws, claws, and belly. You express yourself strongly. Allow me to inform you that I myself am proud to say it, am the citizen of a Kumpash. No longer, answered Tari. Wonder, I no longer, answered Tari. Wonder to see you here so far from home. When was the condition of your native community when it became a Kumpash? A settlement of immigrants, like those settlements which your tribe sends forth, but so far unlike your settlements that it was dependent on the state from which it came. It shook off that yoke, and crowned with eternal glory became a Kumpash. Eternal glory! How long has the Kumpash lasted? About 100 years. The length of an Arn's life, a very young community. In much less than another 100 years your Kumpash will be a Gleknaz. Nay, the oldest states in the world I come from have such faith in its duration that they are all gradually shaping their institutions so as to melt into ours, and their most thoughtful politicians say that, whether they like it or not, the inevitable tendency of these old states is toward Kumpashery. The old states? Yes, the old states. With populations very small in proportion to the area of productive land? On the contrary, with populations very large in proportion to that area. I see. Old states indeed. So old as to become driveling if they don't pack off that surplus population as we do ours. Very old states. Very, very old. Pray, Tish, do you think it wise for very old men to try to turn head over heels as very young children do? And if you ask them why they attempted such antics, should you not laugh if they answered that by imitating very young children they become very young children themselves? Ancient history abounds with instances of this sort, a great many thousand years ago, and in every instance a very old state that played at Kumpash soon tumbled into Gleknaz. Then, in horror of its own self, it cried out for a master, as an old man in his dotage cries out for a nurse, and after a succession of masters or nurses more or less long, that very old state died out of history. A very old state attempting Kumpashery is like a very old man who pulls down the house to which he has been accustomed, but he has so exhausted his vigor in pulling down that all he can do in the way of rebuilding is to run up a crazy hut, in which himself and his successors whine out, "How the wind blows, how the walls shake!" My dear Tari, I make all excuse for your unenlightened prejudices, which every schoolboy educated in a Kumpash could easily controvert, though he might not be so precociously learned in ancient history as you appear to be. I, learned! Not a bit of it. But a school but would a schoolboy educated in your kumpash ask his great great grandfather or great great grandmother to stand on his or her head with the feet uppermost? And if the poor old folks hesitated, say, "What do you fear? See how I do it." Tari, I disdain to argue with a child of your age. I repeat, I make allowances for your want of that culture which a kumpash alone can bestow. I, in my turn, answered Tari, with an air of the suave but lofty good breeding which characterizes his race, not only make allowances for you as not educated among the Vril-Ya, but I entreat you to vouchsafe me your pardon for the insufficient respect to the habits and opinions of so amiable a Tish. I ought before to have observed that I was commonly called Tish by my host and his family, as being a polite and indeed a pet name, literally signifying a small barbarian, the children applying it endearingly to the tame species of frog which they keep in their gardens. We had now reached the banks of a lake, and Tari here paused to point out to me the ravages made in fields skirting it. The enemy certainly lies within these waters, said Tari. Observe what shoals of fish are crowded together at the margin. Even the great fishes or the small ones who are the habitual prey, and who generally shun them, all forget their instincts in the presence of a common destroyer. This reptile certainly must belong to the class of Acreca, which are more devouring than any other, and are said to be among the few surviving species of the world's dreadest inhabitants before the Arna were created. The appetite of a Krek is insatiable, feeds alike upon vegetable and animal life, but for the swift-footed creatures of the elk species it is too slow in its movements. Its favorite dainty is an arn when it can catch him unawares, and hence the Arna destroy it relentlessly whenever it enters their domain. I have heard that when our forefathers first cleared this country, these monsters and others like them abounded, and Vril being then undiscovered, many of our race were devoured. It was impossible to exterminate them wholly till that discovery which constitutes the power and sustains the civilization of our race. But after the uses of Vril became familiar to us, all creatures inimical to us were soon annihilated. Still, once a year or so, one of these enormous creatures wanders from the unreclaimed and savage districts beyond, and within my memory one is seized upon a young guy who was bathing in this very lake. Had she been on land and armed with her staff, it would not have dared even to show itself, for, like all savage creatures, the reptile had a marvelous instinct which warns it against the bearer of the vril wand. How they teach their young to avoid him, though seen for the first time, is one of those mysteries which you may ask Z to explain, for I cannot. The reptile in this domain does but resemble our wild birds and animals, which will not come in reach of a man armed with a gun. When the electric wires were first put up, partridges stuck against them in their flight and fell down wounded. No younger generations of partridges meet with a similar accident. So long as I stand here, the monster will not stir from its lurking place, but we must now decoy it forth. Will that not be difficult? Not at all. Seat yourself yonder on that crag, about 100 yards from the bank, while I retire to a distance. In a short time the reptile will catch sight or scent of you, and perceiving that you are no vril bearer, will come forth to devour you. As soon as it is fairly out of the water, it becomes my prey. Do you mean to tell me that I am to be the decoy to that horrible monster which could engulf me within its jaws in a second? I begged to decline. The child laughed. Fear nothing, said he. Only sit still. Instead of obeying the command, I made a bound, was about to take fairly to my heels when Tari touched me slightly on the shoulder, and fixing his eyes steadily on mine, I was rooted to the spot. All power of volition left me. Submissive to the infant's gesture, I followed him to the crag he had indicated, and seated myself there in silence. Most readers have seen something of the effects of electrobiology, whether genuine or spurious. No professor of that doubtful craft had ever been able to influence a thought or a movement of mine, but I was a mere machine at the will of this terrible child. Meanwhile, he expanded his wings, soared aloft, and alighted amidst a copse at the brow of a hill at some distance. I was alone, and turning my eyes with an indescribable sensation of horror towards the lake, I kept them fixed on its water, spellbound. It might be 10 or 15 minutes, to me it seemed ages, before the still surface, gleaming under the lamplight, began to be agitated towards the center. At the same time, the shoals of fish near the margin evinced their sense of the enemy approaching by splash and leap and babbling circle. I could detect their hurried flight hither and thither, some even casting themselves ashore. A long, dark, undulous furrow came moving along the waters, nearer and nearer till the vast head of the reptile emerged, its jaws bristling with fangs, and its dull eyes fixing themselves hungrily on the spot where I sat motionless. And now its forefeet were on the strand, now its enormous breast, scaled on either side as in armor, in the center showing its corrugated skin of a dull, venomous yellow. And now its whole length was on the land, 100 feet or more from the jaw to the tail. Another stride of this ghastly feet, of those ghastly feet, would have brought it to the spot where I sat. There was but a moment between me and this grim form of death, when what seemed a flash of lightning shot through the air, smote, and, for a second time briefer than that in which a man can draw his breath, enveloped the monster. And then, as the flash vanished, there lay before me a blackened, charred, smoldering mass, a something gigantic, but of which even the outlines of form were burned away, and rapidly crumbling into dust and ashes. I remained still seated, still speechless, ice cold, in a new sensation of dread. What had been horror was now awe. I felt the child's hand on my head. Fear left me. The spell was broken. I rose up. You see with what ease the Vilya destroy their enemies, said Tari, and then, moving towards the bank, he contemplated the smoldering relics of the monster and said quietly, I have destroyed larger creatures, but none with so much pleasure. Yes, it is a Krek. What suffering it must have inflicted while it lived. Then he took up the poor fishes that had flung themselves ashore and restored them mercifully to their native element. End chapter. Hey, Chicago. Well, it's in the title of the video, and it's called The Coming Race by Edward Bulwer Lytton. We can continue with chapter 19, it's a short one. As we walked back to town, Tari took a new and circuitous way in order to show me what, to use a familiar term, I will call the station, from which immigrants or travelers to other communities commence their journeys. I had, on a former occasion, expressed a wish to see their vehicles. These I found to be of two kinds, one for land journeys, one for aerial journeys. The former were of all sizes and forms, some not larger than an ordinary carriage, some movable houses of one story and containing several rooms, furnished according to the ideas of comfort or luxury which are entertained by the Vril-Ya. The aerial vehicles were of light substances, not the least resembling our balloons, but rather our boats and pleasure vessels, with helm and rudder, with large wings or paddles and a central machine worked by Vril. All the vehicles, both for land or air, were indeed worked by that potent and mysterious agency. I saw a convoy set out on its journey, but it had few passengers, containing chiefly articles of merchandise, and was bound to a neighboring community, for among all the tribes of the Vril-Ya there is considerable commercial interchange. I may here observe that their money currency does not consist of the precious metals which are too common among them for that purpose. The smaller coins in ordinary use are manufactured from a peculiar fossil shell, the comparatively scarce remnant of some very early deluge or other convulsion of nature, by which a species has become extinct. It is minute and flat as an oyster, and takes a jewel-like polish. This coinage circulates among all the tribes of the Vrilya. Their larger transactions are carried on much like ours by bills of exchange and thin metallic plates which answer the purpose of our banknotes. Let me take this occasion of adding that the taxation among the tribe I became acquainted with was very considerable, compared with the amount of population. But I never heard that anyone grumbled at it, for it was devoted to purposes of universal utility, and indeed necessary to the civilization of the tribe. The cost of lighting so large a range of country, of providing for emigration, of maintaining the public buildings at which the various operations of national intellect were carried on, from the first education of an infant to the departments in which the College of Sages were perpetually trying new experiments in mechanical science, all these involve the necessity of considerable state funds. To these I must add an item that struck me as very singular. I have said that all the human labor required by the state is carried on by children up to the marriageable age. For this labor the state pays, and at a rate immeasurably higher than our own remuneration to labor even in the United States. According to their theory, every child, male or female, on attaining the marriageable age, and there terminating the period of labor, should have acquired enough for an independent competence during life, as, no matter what the disparity of fortune in the parents, all the children must equally serve, so all are equally paid according to their several ages or the nature of their work. Where the parents or friends choose to retain a child in their own service, they must pay into the public fund in the same ratio as the state pays to the children it employs, and this sum is handed over to the child when the period of service expires. This practice serves, no doubt, to render the notion of social equality familiar and agreeable, and if it may be said that all the children form a democracy, no less truly it may be said that all the adults form an aristocracy. The exquisite politeness and refinement of manners among the Frilya, the generosity of their sentiments, the absolute leisure they enjoy for following out their own private pursuits, the amenities of their domestic intercourse, in which they seem as members of one noble order that can have no distrust of each other's word or deed, all combine to make the Vrilya the most perfect nobility which a political disciple of Plato or Sidney could conceive for the ideal of an aristocratic republic. In chapter 19. This book is dumb. Trying to pass itself off as very intelligent. You can tell that he's a Londoner trying to pretend to be an American. His biases slip through the page all the time. His character doesn't act like very much like an American at all. This next chapter is a large one, and I don't feel like reading this anymore. It's not good. I need to call up a guy named Dick. Richard Johnson. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go hang out with a guy named Dick. His name is Dick Johnson. He's an asshole in the zombie frontier. His name is Dick Johnson. Be careful or he'll shoot you in the rear. Dick Johnson. I'm going to hell. They're going to put me right in hell. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You, sir, are going to hell for that joke. Jesus doesn't like the funny mans. How many fucking stand-up comedians were in the Apostles? Huh? How many of the Apostles were stand-up comedians, huh? It's all good, Chicago. All right. Eric is still in voice. He'll figure it out. Oh, right, that's right. I remember. The mouse is indoors. Okay. Okay. This might actually be comfortable for an hour or two. Maybe I get some work done. All right, dudes. Thanks for showing. Thanks for hanging out. I am gonna work on other projects. Oh, Eric, you just missed it, pal. You just missed it. I can't record audio and hang out with you guys. What about you? You fell asleep, poor Eric. Yeah, thank you. Chicago, you have a good night too, buddy. Hello, Bobby. You're number one. You got it back, Eric. Good job, buddy. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm not going to be in the Discord either. I'm going to go play some of the games that I play for the channel now. Get a couple of hours of recording in. Sorry, buddy. You know, it has to be okay. I'll talk to you tomorrow, though. Yeah, see? You got something to look forward to anyway. Yeah, you have a great night too, Eric. Thanks for the well wishes. Glad you got you some sleeps. If I'm still up in a couple of hours, I don't know, make myself available again. Leave my phone on while I'm sleeping. So, who knows? Yeah, you be safe too, buddy. Yeah, I really like that game a lot, and it has a lot to offer me. Um, and it's still early access, so there are some things I'm going to ask them to put in it. It was fun. All right, have a good night, guys. If you don't see from me later.